Okay, we're all set. Welcome, everyone. And if we could just mute microphones and we'll get started with our meditation. So if you could just take a couple of deep breaths and just breathe in peace and harmony, and just breathe out any cares, any thoughts. Let them go. And just breathe in relaxation and breathe out any stresses, any tensions in the body. There's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Just allow yourself to be in the present moment, the only moment that is. And if we could just now do our head and neck and breathing exercises. Now I'll say the Lord's Prayer, the prayer of attunement and protection. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. The affirmation from Know Thyself, a lesson from a search for God. Father, as we seek to see and know thy face, may we each as individuals and as a group come to know ourselves, even as we are known, that we, as lights in thee, may give the better concept of thy spirit in this world. And the prayer of protection, as we open our hearts to the unseen forces that surround the throne of grace, beauty, and might, we throw about ourselves the protection found in the thought of the Christ. And we'll just go into the silence for approximately 8 to 10 minutes. Would you end your meditations now, please, and bring your awareness back to your room? And Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this opportunity of spending time communing with Thou in the silence. And we ask that the healing energies that may have been raised during our meditation period, that they may be sent out to those who are in need of prayer, and especially to all of those who have no one to pray for them. Thank you, Father. Amen. Okay. So we're looking tonight at chapter 5 of Meditation and the Mind of Man. So we're getting close towards the end of it now. There's only 2 more chapters after this one. But it's just been the most interesting book. The information and the practical approach to it all has just been wonderful.
So, still reading from the book Meditation and the Mind of Man, Chapter 5, The Pattern and the Power. An implication of the concepts that we are children of God and made in His image is that we are miniature replicas of the universe. There is nothing in the universe that man can understand that doesn't have its representation within man himself. God made man as he is, so that even in the limitations of three-dimensional consciousness, man could come to an awareness of his oneness with him. The realization of that awareness is dependent upon the choices that man makes in the utilization of the one creative energy to which he has been given access. As man uses this energy, he imparts qualities of form to it. The formal or vibrational pattern that the energy takes on is determined by what is being held in the mind. Mind is the builder, and the thought patterns created by the mind can serve as a hindrance or as an aid to greater self-awareness, depending upon their nature. If they are in harmony with universal laws, they give life, love, and attunement. At the fourth dimensional level, man has access to every thought he has ever created. Recall the relationship between the fourth dimension and an idea. His greatest responses of love and kindness have been recorded there, as well as the patterns of his greatest fears and resentments. Jung's concept of archetypal patterns. In addition to those patterns which have been personally created by an individual's mind throughout all of his experiences, each of us has access to patterns that are shared in common with all mankind. These impersonal or archetypal patterns are manifested in the dreams and the myths of all cultures. Many of the writings of Carl Jung refer to them, differentiating between patterns based upon one's own unique experiences and those that are innate to all. Jung writes, a more or less superficial layer of the unconscious is undoubtedly personal. I call it the personal unconscious, but this personal unconscious rests upon a deeper layer which does not derive from personal experience and is not a personal acquisition but is informed. This layer I call the collective unconscious. I have chosen the term collective because this part of the unconscious is not individual but universal. In contrast to the personal psyche, it has contents and modes of behavior that are more or less the same everywhere and in all individuals. It is, in other words, identical in all men and thus constitutes a common psychic substrate of a supra-personal nature which is present in every one of us. The contents of the collective unconscious are known as archetypes. The archetypes and the collective unconscious, page 3. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious may not be directly correlated with the subconscious as Cayce described it. However, they are clearly similar. The readings indicate that all subconscious minds are in contact one with another. According to both concepts, the body provides the instrumentation and the fourth dimensional reality of the mind as thoughts or ideas, provides the channel for the exchange of energy. The relationships may be diagrammed as follows. In his investigation of symbology, Lama Govinda comes to a conclusion similar to Jung's. While mantric symbols have their origin within the cultural realm of a certain language or civilization, there are other symbols of figurative and conceptual nature, the origin of which cannot be traced to any particular place, tribe, or race, and which are not bound to any particular period of human civilization or to any religion, but which are the common property of humanity. These symbols may disappear in one place. In fact, they may be buried for centuries only to reappear at another place and to rise resurrected in a new and more brilliant garb. They may change their names and even their meaning according to the emphasis laid upon the one or the other of their aspects without losing their original direction. Because it is in the nature of a symbol to be as manifold as the life from which it grew, and yet to retain its character, its organic unity within the diversity of its aspects. Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, page 51. An example of an archetypal image is a dream, vision, or symbolic representation of the lion or the great cat. In the Old Testament, Ezekiel had a vision in which he saw four beasts, or four cherubs, as he called them, a calf, a man, a lion, and an eagle. Ezekiel 10:14. Similarly, in the New Testament, one of John's visions, recounted in the Revelation, includes the appearance of these same four beasts. Interpreting these visions, The Edgar Cayce readings indicate that they are specifically appropriate visual representations of structures and processes in the physical body. We may, for example, liken the visionary experience of the lion to the physiological activity of the adrenals. Seeing the image of a lion is likely to awaken in us a feeling of power and energy which is related to the adrenal activities. Or, if there is particularly strong adrenal activity going on in the body, there may be an accompanying visualization, such as in a dream, of the lion or the great cat. One man, in the midst of problems of resentment towards his wife, who had left him, dreamed that he was watching an activity on a stage while sitting in the front row of a theater. His feet extended forward so that they reached into a cage situated beneath the stage. He looked down and saw that within the cage there was a lion which was gnawing at his feet. This dream was an excellent portrayal of the pathological process that was taking place within him. The stage and its activity correspond to the conscious mind. Beneath this, he became aware of the forces symbolized by the lion, which were gnawing away within him. This dream is a precise description of the way in which continued resentment awakens within us, a physiological and emotional process of the adrenals and of the way in which chronic stimulation of hormonal secretions sets up processes that gnaw away at the health of the body. In the dream, the disruptive situation was given visual representation in archetypal symbology related to the adrenal activity. The archetype is related not only to the visual imagery but words to appreciate but words, sorry. In other words, to appreciate fully a symbol, we must realize that it can represent not only a pattern of energy in the subconscious mind but also a condition, activity, or response of the physical body. Commenting on the importance of understanding this dual nature of a symbol, Lama Govinda writes, "A thing exists only insofar as it acts. Reality is actuality. An active symbol or image of spiritual vision is reality. An acting symbol or image is empty form, at the best, a decorative construction or the remembrance of a concept, a thought, or an event belonging to the past." Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, pages 105 to 6. Insofar as our culture places great value on or idolizes individual power, we worship it. Thus, in a symbolic sense, we can see the lion or the great cat as the totem or sacred animal of our times. We incorporate it into our lives because we want to possess its qualities. It is a matter of fact that if you put the likeness of a great cat on a product, it will sell. A tiger in the tank sells gasoline. Tony the tiger sells breakfast cereal, and a mountain lion on top of a sign sells automobiles. Advertising firms may not be interested in hearing about archetypal symbols, but they know that they work. Why do they work? The visual imagery triggers a specific and appropriate response system in the body. Almost universally, people agree that the great cats symbolize a kind of independent, controlled power, which is a greatly admired quality in our culture. Products bearing this image awaken within us an energy flow associated with the solar plexus and the adrenal glands. We like the feeling of this flow. Therefore, we want to possess such products and we may come to worship them. Another example of an archetypal image is the dream or vision of a bird. Of Often, this takes the form of an eagle, as in the visions of Ezekiel and John. The Edgar Cayce readings interpret this symbol as being related to the activities of the heart center and the thymus gland. A clue to the psychological factor corresponding to this center is given in the description of the fourth church in the Revelation, which the readings say is emblematic of the thymus center. The virtue of this church is said to be charity or love, and the fault is fornication. If the activities of this center are out of balance, this quality can easily turn to concern, worry, or jealousy. Often in language or symbolism, we use the archetype of the bird when we wish to express this kind of attitude. For example, during the Vietnam War, we applied the terms hawks and doves to two different types of concern. As another illustration, someone who is overly protective in a motherly sort of way is often called a mother hen. These examples point out that an archetype consists of both a visual experience and an accompanying physiological process related to the way in which we are made. We are all made in such a way that we are predisposed to having similar kinds of experiences. As miniature replicas of the universe, we have innumerable patterns within us which are found in other forms of life. We may think of a lion as biologically more capable of rage than a rabbit. When a response potential assumes a major role in the organizational hierarchy of our total functioning, its expression may be accompanied by recognizable archetypal symbols. The Christ as an archetype. One of the archetypal patterns in the unconscious of man is particularly consistent in the qualities of its manifestations with the original nature of the one creative energy. That nature is the life of good and of love. That pattern is the pattern of the Christ. The Christ pattern stands as an answer to the state of disunity with oneself, a condition that Jung refers to as the hallmark of civilized man. We can think of neurosis as a state of divisiveness with the self, in which different parts of a man are driving him towards contrary ends. A prevalent state of affairs for a man in our culture is to feel driven to do one thing by his analytical mind, to do another thing by his feelings or intuitions, and to do a third thing by the desires of his physical body. Illnesses of body and mind are the likely result of coping measures designed to deal symptomatically with this fragmentation. In contrast to this, we can identify a process within man that tends to draw together seemingly diverse elements of consciousness. The highest activity or function of man is to work towards a state of integration. Because intellect without feeling, knowledge without love, reason without compassion leads to pure negation, to rigidity, to spiritual death, to mere vacuity, while feeling without reason, love without knowledge, blind love, compassion without understanding lead to confusion and dissolution. But where both sides are united, where the great synthesis of heart and head, feeling and intellect, highest love and deepest knowledge have taken place, there completeness is re-established, perfect enlightenment is attained. Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, page 97. On the one hand, This might be the integration of two conflicting drives or desires within a man, such as the hunger drive and the desire to have a slim, energetic physical body. An integrative pattern or archetype must function to bring together and not to exclude one factor in favor of another. A man functioning under such a pattern will find a diet that gives him sufficient amounts of food to satisfy his hunger and which is of a high enough nutritional quality to give him the energy he needs without gaining weight. At a deeper level, this integrative process will be the union of the two seemingly contradictory polarities in the nature of man, the infinite and the finite. The work that God has for man to do in the earth is not a matter of choosing one nature to the exclusion of the other. Man is not to renounce his humanity to embrace an otherworldly concept of the divine. In many ways, such a choice would be the easy way out. The Christ pattern, the Christ archetype, is the process of integration which involves bringing the awareness of the infinite into the finite. Then the purposes for which an entity enters material experience. As indicated, the entity comes from without or from an unknown quantity into, first, that of desire, association, and conceptive activity with mental and physical growth, developing into a channel through which the spiritual import manifests. Then its purpose is that such an entity as this, 1861, may make manifest the spiritual influence in a material world. This is simply living the law of love. This highest archetype within man can be described not only as a pattern, but as a law. It is within us not only in the sense that we can experience it visually, but in terms of a functioning of the entire body in a healing and integrating fashion. When we live by the law of love, which is giving, we initiate the activity of this archetype in every aspect of our lives. This pattern of functioning is available to all mankind. Jung argues that the rapid spread of Christianity is evidence to support his notion that the Christ is an element of the collective unconscious and hence available to all. Christ would never have made the impression he did on his followers if he had not expressed something that was alive and active in their unconscious. Christianity would never have spread through the pagan world with such outstanding rapidity had its ideas not found an analogous psychic readiness to receive them. It is this fact which also makes it possible to say that whosoever believes in Christ is not only contained in him, but that Christ then dwells in the believer as the perfect man formed in the image of God. Jung, Answer to Job, Collected Works, Volume 11, page 441. Finally, the Christ archetype is a pattern of healing. Man is healed when all the aspects of himself are going in the same direction. Of these aspects, there is one that has never lost contact with the Godhead and which is unchanging. In contrast to this spiritual element of man, all other parts of himself may be altered or may pass away. So, if there is to be an alignment, it will have to be in the direction towards which the spiritual nature of man seeks to grow. Healing or integration must be a step towards greater spiritual unfoldment. It is towards this purpose that the Christ archetype works in the life of man. For as he has done, ye may do, if ye live the life if we act in that way as to bring that full awareness in all phases of the urges within thy body, thy mind, thy soul, being at one. In the Christ consciousness, then, there is the oneness of self, self's desires, self's abilities, made in at one with the forces that may bring to pass that which is sought by an individual entity or soul. And that concludes chapter 5, the pattern and the power from the meditation and the mind of man.
Thank you, Lolita.
Very
Interesting.
mm,
mm,
I remember one of the very first people that came to see my wife as a client. She was suffering from psoriasis, and Maria was struggling to help her overcome it. And she worked out that this particular client had resentment towards someone, and that's what was locking in the problems. So it was interesting that this example of this man with resentment towards his wife had these issues gnawing away at him. So basically, this lady had what was gnawing away at her was within her gut, and that's what was causing the problems with psoriasis in her skin. So once she
Wow.
was able to let go of the resentment, um, the healing process was able to take place. But the resentment was
mm.
locking that in and causing a lot of issues. So it's fascinating with what was said in this about resentment,
Mm,
which is
mm,
related to the adrenals, of course.
mm. Well, cancer, I think, as was written in Louise Hay's book, is actually unforgiveness. And so cancer is like the claws of the crab gnawing away at the cells of the body.
Mm.
Mm.
Yes, and it's pretty hard
Yeah.
to find a drug to eliminate that when it's something psychological to begin with.
But I love the symbology, don't
Mm.
you? It's just so descriptive. And Carl Jung, I just love the uh how he was able to actually um able to touch on the source to have that kind of understanding of the archetypes.
Mm. Interesting.
Um, my wife was actually given directions of how to do archetypal essences, which are essences you take as drops to help uncover hidden patterns within you, archetypal patterns within your consciousness, which are
Mm,
limiting your ability to express yourself because quite often they're unconscious, and taking these drops actually brought it to your conscious awareness, what was going on. And there was, I think, 37 different archetypal
mm.
essences that she developed through her guides and being told what to do and how to do it. And
Wow. You guys are familiar with Carolyn Miss?
Carolyn Mace, yeah,
Yeah, that American medical intuitive. She gives courses on the archetypes. She has books written about archetypes.
yeah.
Mm. Mm. Interesting.
Okay, I suppose I better do my section. Chapter 5, The Pattern and the Power Continued, presented by Russell Bowey. Can everyone see that? Okay. Right. Jesus is the pattern. For certain purposes, the Edgar Cayce readings make a distinction between the Christ and Jesus. Although it has been the tendency of many Christian theologians to use these names synonymously, the readings suggest that we will form a better understanding of ourselves by considering the difference between these two words. Question 1. What is the meaning and significance of the words Jesus and Christ? Answer. Just as indicated, Jesus is the man, the activity, the mind, the relationships that he bore to others. Yea, he was mindful of friends, he was sociable, he was loving, he was kind, he was gentle. He grew faint, he grew weak, and yet gained that strength that he has promised in becoming the Christ, by fulfilling and overcoming the world. You are made strong in mind, in body, in mind, in soul and purpose by that power in Christ. The power then is in the Christ. The pattern is in Jesus. From the time of his creation, there has existed within man the awareness of his own divine nature. Through the ages, he has made choices that have built barriers between that universal state of consciousness and his own ego awareness. It was this process of self-imposed limitation that brought man to the point where he saw himself as primarily a physical body with the mind little understood and the soul nearly forgotten. That pattern of love and integration, which had always been a part of man's nature, was contacted only by the few who had not totally encased their conscious awareness in thought patterns which were selfish and limiting. It was at this point in history that the Spirit of the Christ manifested in the world in the life of the man Jesus. As man found himself out of touch with that complete consciousness of the oneness of God, it became necessary that the will of God, the Father, be made manifested, that a pattern be introduced into man's consciousness. Thus the Son of Man came into the earth, made in the form, the likeness of man, with body, mind, soul. The wisdom then of the Lord thy God is shown thee, is exemplified to thee, is patterned for thee in the life of Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Christ. The readings speak of Jesus as the pattern in two senses of the word. First, there is his relationship to that state of consciousness of the awareness of his oneness with the Godhead. This is the state of consciousness or the pattern that has always existed within man and which we can associate with the superconscious mind. Jesus lived in contact with this level of awareness and was one with the pattern in this sense. Equally important, he manifested his awareness in his relationship to the world around him. By living out that high consciousness, he became the pattern in a second sense. The activities of his life and his approach to relationships of all kinds form a pattern that is the key to our individual attainment of the awareness of our true nature. In order to understand how it is the key, we need to recall the dual nature of any archetype. This consists of both a visual experience related to the awareness or the consciousness and an accompanying physical response, such as was exemplified in the activation of the adrenal glands. Just as the experience of the symbol can result in the physiological response of the body, the presence of certain physical activities can lead to an experience of the symbol. As an example of the latter case, we have seen how prolonged periods of resentment and the accompanying adrenal activity can lead to the appearance of the image of the great cat in the dream life. In a similar fashion, if we will begin to act in selfless ways and thus put into action the physiological aspects of the Christ archetype, which would relate to the activities and the attitudes of the life of Jesus, the other aspect of the Christ pattern will begin to emerge, the conscious awareness of our oneness with God. It is important to remember that the active aspect of the archetype includes the attitude with which any action is carried out. Doing good deeds for outward show without having an attitude of love and genuine concern for others will not be enough to awaken higher consciousness. The nature of the pattern. In the broadest sense, the nature of the Christ archetype is love, but in order to understand it more fully, it is helpful to look at some of the individual aspects or qualities of this pattern. And there's actually 12 of these aspects or qualities. Number one, it is relevant to human experience. The first question that we must ask ourselves about the life of Jesus is, did he have to deal with the problems with which we have to deal now? Some feel that we can dismiss the life and example of this man because he was evolved to such a point in his awareness that he was above the problems and concerns with which most of us have to work. In contrast to this, the Edgar Cayce reading suggests that Jesus did have to confront and make choices concerning every element of his own humanity. The pattern of his life answers every question about human experience. In the urges then, keep in that way ever of being a channel through which the greater amount of good may come to all, being, as the Master himself, all things to all people, tempted in all points like each soul, and yet without offence to any. Who will approach the throne that ye may know that there is none that surpasses the Son of Man in his approach to human experience in the material world? Number two, the pattern is established for all. Just as with all archetypal patterns, the pattern of the life of Jesus exists at a level that is accessible to all mankind. This is not a matter of a man's beliefs, rather it is related to certain laws about the nature of the mind. Just as we have access to the thought patterns of each other at the fourth dimensional level through the process called telepathy, so do we have access to that pattern built by the Master. We can think of this as a very real thing that exists in terms of energy and form. Like every other energy pattern created by the mind at the fourth dimensional level, a man can choose to ignore it and deny its existence, or to recognize it and allow it to manifest in his own life. For the Master Jesus, even the Christ, is the pattern for every man in the earth, whether he be Gentile or Jew, Parthenian or Greek. For all have the pattern, whether they call on that name or not. Number three, it manifests in the life of service. The state of consciousness which we seek is the awareness of the unity of all being. An essential aspect of the nature of the Christ pattern is dealing with the world around us in such a way as to affirm the oneness that exists between ourselves and every other person and every element of nature. The life of service and the acceptance of responsibility in our relationships is such an affirmation. Being an aid to others in their growth is an integral part of our own growth. And the entity will find more and more that, in that parlance, as may be said, that ye approach more and more to the very throne of grace, you will find thyself leaning upon the arms of some to whom ye have shown those fruits of the Spirit, to someone ye have comforted in trials, to someone you have fed, whether in the fruits of the Spirit or in the needs of the body or the heart. These be those things that bring the consciousness of his abiding presence. The attainment of this state of salvation implies the overcoming of all narrow individual limitations and the recognition of super-individual realities within one's own mind. It is the most universal experience that human mind can attain, and from the very outset it demands a universal attitude. For he who strives for his own salvation, or merely with a view of getting rid of suffering in the shortest possible way, without regard for his fellow beings, has already deprived himself of the most essential means for the realization of his aim. Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, page 279. Number 4, it sees God in every expression. One of the fundamental premises of the Edgar Cayce readings is that there is only one entity or force in the universe. This energy of the Godhead finds expression in many different forms, some of which have been created by man for selfish purposes. In essence, everything that we see is a manifestation of God. The pattern of Jesus is to see things at their deepest level and to relate to them in that way. To do otherwise is to separate life into those things which are of God and those which are of evil. It is sometimes difficult for a man to accept the principle that as he does unto the least of those around him, he is doing unto the whole to God. This is the law and the nature of the pattern. Hence there are laws immutable, unchanging. These are of spiritual import, yet are applicable in the experience of each entity in its dealings with its fellow man. That ye sow, that ye reap. As ye do unto thy fellow man, even the lowest in thine estimation, so ye do unto thy Maker. For the imprint, the soul, the spirit of each entity is a part of that great whole, that I am, by which the individual ego would seek to pattern itself. The image of him is within thine own self, if ye will but open thy heart, thy mind, thy conscience to the indwelling of that force, of that promise, which is thine own, if ye will but embrace same. Which is more real, the love manifested in the Son, the Saviour for his brethren, or the essence of love that may be seen even in the vilest of passion? They are one. Similarly, Lama Govinda, writing of the qualities of the consciousness of enlightenment, states that one of the principles which we must understand is the oneness that lies behind seeming dualities. For the highest qualities are potentially contained in the lower ones, like the blossom in the seed. Thus, good and bad, the sacred and the profane, the sensual and the spiritual, the worldly and the transcendental, ignorance and enlightenment, samsara and nirvana, etc., are not absolute opposites or concepts of entirely different categories, but two sides of the same reality. Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, pages 107 and 8. The great Greek novelist Nikos Kazantzakis illustrates the same aspect of the Christ pattern in a story about St. Francis of Assisi. For years, St. Francis had become afraid at the sight of a leper, but he came to the realization that he had to accept this challenge that God had placed before him and love and embrace even such an ugly person. While he was walking to the city, a leper appeared along the road, and St. Francis was finally able to see the inner essence of such a diseased body. Half of his putrescent nose had fallen away. His hands were without fingers, just stumps, and his lips were an oozing wound. Throwing himself upon the leper, Francis embraced him, then lowered his head and kissed him upon the lips. St. Francis then covered him with his robe, and they began to walk together towards the city. They walked for several hours until they were nearly to its gates. Suddenly I saw Francis stop abruptly. He bent down and drew aside the robe in order to uncover the leper. But all at once he uttered a loud cry. The robe was empty. The tears flowing from his eyes, he fell prostrate on the ground and began to kiss the soil. I remained standing above him, trembling. It wasn't a leper, it was Christ himself who had come down to earth in the form of a leper in order to test Francis. St. Francis, pages 94 to 5. The same principle pertains to the way in which we relate to the various parts of ourselves. Since the Christ pattern involves a process of integration, we must be willing to accept even the most unwanted parts of ourselves. To see the good in that which we would prefer to hide from ourselves and others is a difficult task. Carl Jung writes that such a capacity to see the Christ in even the least commendable parts of ourselves is necessary to mental health. In actual life, it requires the greatest art to be simple, and so acceptance of oneself is the essence of the moral problem and the acid test of one's whole outlook on life. That I feed the beggar, that I forgive an insult, that I love my enemy in the name of the Christ, all of these are undoubtedly great virtues. But what I do unto the least of my brethren, that I do unto Christ. But what if I should discover that the least amongst them all, the poorest of all beggars, the most impudent of all offenders, yea, the very fiend himself, that these are within me, that I myself stand in need of the arms of my own kindness, that I myself am the enemy that must be loved. What then? Modern Man in Search of a Soul, page 235. Jesus said, "It is I, be not afraid," John 6:20. We must grow to the awareness of seeing him in everything and everyone. Thus we turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones. Number 5, it is obedient to higher law. In a culture where we prefer to talk of personal freedom and doing your own thing, the concept of obedience is quickly tossed aside. Yet how can we become one with ourselves if we are unwilling to do what we know we ought to do? Too easily we fall into the notion that we are not enlightened because we are trapped by exterior laws or rules of behaviour. While it may be true that man can limit himself by constrictive rules or morals, diet, and other forms of human behaviour, the fact remains that the universe is governed by certain immutable laws. One aspect of the nature of the Christ pattern is related to the way in which Jesus responded to his knowledge of these universal laws. Man becomes one with the law only as he is joyfully obedient to it. Hence we find, as the sun represents the mind of self, it is then necessary that each soul choose the being of one mind with him, who thought it not robbery to make himself equal with God, and who hath called to everyone, "Be ye perfect, even as my Father in heaven is perfect." What, ye ask, has this to do with the trials, the temptations, the disappointments that have come into the experience of every individual at one point or another? Learn, even as it was said of him, that though he were the Son, even he learned obedience through the things which he suffered. One of the fundamental laws to which man must be obedient is his own nature as a spiritual being. We must be obedient to the fact that we are divine, and our refusal to accept the validity of this idea often causes us to suffer. Such suffering can be used as a learning mechanism. Often in such a state, man is forced to reach deeply within himself to find new strengths in order to get through these periods. Capacities and levels of awareness that otherwise might remain unknown break forth into consciousness because of the great need. In this way, suffering can become a stepping stone to greater self-awareness. Remember rather the pattern that was manifested for thee in the Son, how that though he were the Son, yet learned he obedient through the things which he suffered. He used then that which was necessary in the experience in the earth as periods of suffering, as periods of rejection, even by his own that he had called, that were his friends, not as stumbling stones, but as stepping stones to make for thee, for the world, that access for each soul, for the closer relationship with the Father through the Son to the children of men. Number 6, it is joyous. The reading stressed that Jesus was not a solemn or joyless person. An important aspect of his pattern is the capacity to laugh with life and with oneself, even in times of trouble. Cultivate the ability to see the ridiculous and to retain the ability to laugh. For no, only in those that God hath favoured is the ability to laugh, even when clouds of doubt arise, or when every form of disturbance arises. For remember, the Master smiled and laughed oft, even on the way to Gethsemane. Number 7, it is compassionate. One of the most common complaints in our times is, no one understands me. Such feelings of alienation and separateness are the result of being out of contact with the level of one's being, where the fundamental oneness is perceived. It is the nature of the Christ pattern to accept responsibility for helping one's neighbour when he is in such a state. And one way to do this is with sympathy. Sympathy, meaning to feel with another, involves not only an acceptance of where another person is in consciousness, but a willingness to move in one's own awareness in order to experience that feeling with him. For he wept with those who wept, and rejoiced with those who rejoiced. Accepting such a concept may be difficult for some who prefer to think that the spiritually enlightened person is able to remain strong and detached from the display of feelings of those around him. Much has been made of the relative desirability of empathy as opposed to sympathy, because the former involves an attempt to understand the internal state of another without experiencing his feelings or emotions with him. Certainly it is true that it would be very difficult to maintain a state of mental balance if one were constantly trying to experience the emotions of others. In the Christ pattern, there is a sensitivity and a knowing as to when such a sympathetic response is necessary as an aid to the spiritual growth of another. With the desire to be of service to others, there will come a psychic sensitivity which will often meet the need that may arise to understand the emotional and mental workings of another. Sympathy is a part of the Christ pattern as it is used for others and not for emotional self-indulgence. Often it takes the wisdom of the Christ for us to know for which purpose we are using it. There are instances where we express love by moving in awareness to where another who is in need finds himself. This principle is illustrated in a story related by Rosalind Haywood, who has been called the mother of parapsychology. In her book, ESP, A Personal Memoir, she described an experience that came to her while she was in a heightened, altered state of consciousness. While in this state, she was shown what it would like for those individuals who were schizophrenic. And terrible it was. At its furthest point, I came on a cold, grey, stony El Greco-like desert, its monotony broken only by jagged rocks. There was not a leaf to be seen anywhere, not a blade of grass. Huddled far apart among the rocks were grey, veiled figures, motionless, unable to communicate. At the bottom, beyond despair. They were, I knew, the lost. I have never before or since felt the total compassion I felt then. I remember pausing by one of them and thinking desperately, is there nothing I can do to rouse and comfort him? And the answer was, nothing. I could make no contact. I was not good enough. Nonetheless, it appeared that the perfectly good could help the lost. And to do so, they had to sink in sacrifice even below them to become the objects of their pity and compassion. It was only by giving those at the bottom a chance to help others who needed it that they could be saved. And by some strange paradox, only the perfectly good could get below them to need their love. ESP, A Personal Memoir, pages 209 to 10. Number 8, it lives in the present. There is that within man which says, I am. It is always here and always in the now. It is difficult for man in a three-dimensional consciousness that divides time into past, present, and future to understand that his consciousness is in the eternal now. To his contemporaries who awaited the establishment of a divine order in the earth at some unspecified point in the future, Jesus' message was that at that very moment, the kingdom of God as a consciousness was available to everyone who would but choose it. In the material associations, in the material connections, then, do with thy might what thy hand finds to do today, for sufficient unto the day is the good as well as the evil thereof. For as he hath given in thee, that thou may be a channel, the representative, the agent, yea, the very representative in flesh of him, then act in thine inner self, act in thine outward expression, as though thou wert, for thou art his child, and are heir to all the glories, here, now, of his kingdom, not in the future, not in the past, or in the eternal now is he active in thee. And that's just part of the pattern of to be found in the Christ.
Thank you, Russell.
Boy, there's certainly a lot in that.
A lot, a lot. It's very interesting, though. Very interesting.
Yeah, very good. I know that Rosalind Haywood. I've read about her. She was very interesting. She was very psychic. Yeah, I didn't know that she was called the mother of parapsychology, but that does make sense.
That was interesting about Saint Francis of Assisi overcoming what he overcome. In life coaching, we say whatever is in the way is the way. It's like if there is a log in front of you, you cannot go past it by just looking at it or complaining about it. You have to jump over it, so you passed it. So whatever's in the way is the way, and he successfully did it, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah. Kissing a leper on the lips.
Oh, yeah, especially if they were oozing. But yeah, well, he was able to do it, and that's yeah, because we quite often dodge or try to avoid a lot of things in life, those unpleasant things that we find difficult to confront or work with, but they keep appearing more and more over and over again until we decide, okay, I get the hint, I'm going to do something about it. It's like the story of the man. Every time he walked down this passageway, he was tripping over a mop and a bucket. He kept complaining about who left this here. Eventually realised that it was left there because he had to clean the floor.
It's very interesting that a lot of I've been through it personally, where I really couldn't pass the test until I actually face it or sit for it, and then once I passed it, it doesn't, you go to the next grade. Yeah, but I cannot be ready for the next grade until I pass this test.
Yeah.
And we humans try to keep avoiding it, without knowing that, the universe will keep presenting it to you until you pass it.
Mm.
Yes.
I like how he talks about the archetype has a visual trigger that causes a physical response. I've never quite thought of it like that. That when you see some of these archetypal visions, the lion or the eagle and so on, it has a response within you that is very visceral, really. Yeah, kind of interesting. So you can use them as meditation, like meditation cards, and that will have an effect if you wanted to focus on any particular archetypes. That could be used for healing.
the the other thing that I love is about Jesus being sociable, being, the question, oh,
Yeah,
so something to aspire, And I find that a lot of spiritual people that I know, they really have a sense of humor.
yeah,
Real, yeah. Have you noticed?
yeah.
They
I
have,
have
yeah,
friends who are very like that, and they really, have a great sense of humour.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a joy that is welling from inside of them. It's not something that is just pretend happiness. It is really welling from a fountain within. So you can when I meet people like that, I know that just their aura, just looking at their face, they have that genuine joy and genuine sense of humor.
And almost a childlike playfulness.
Hmm. Well
Yeah.
said. Well
Uh,
said,
Being
Russell.
able to have fun is almost childlike.
that's right. No, I love to learn that about Jesus. I don't think we had that impression of Jesus historically. It used to be more a serious and sober person, but he's saying that he was happy and sociable and also played music. That's another thing. He played, I think, like a flute, something like that.
And love parties.
Yeah, like people enjoyed life. That's a
Well,
good thing.
Ah,
Yeah, it's great. Well, I'm ready for the next one. I'm ready to, if you want to make me host, and I'll share my screen. Okay. So continuing, I think our last one, continuing chapter 5. Number 9, it is forgiving. In the biblical account of Jesus giving the Lord's Prayer to his disciples, he comments afterwards on only one section of the prayer. For if ye forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive you your trespasses. From Matthew 6. We may assume that the master felt that this aspect of the pattern deserved special attention or consideration. Perhaps this is because historically man's attempts to reach God had been so closely tied to sacrifice and not to mercy. It has been suggested that sacrifice was once used to free souls that had projected into matter in animal form and had become trapped. The practice carried on even after such projections had ceased. The practice of sacrifice is only a misunderstanding of how to deal with the realization that purification is necessary. It is true that we need to stop feeding thought patterns which are of a limiting nature, and in that sense to sacrifice our involvement with them. The problem arises when man projects what is an inner process onto the outer world. For example, we realize that a tendency to be rude cuts us off from the consciousness of love, and so we attempt to reject rudeness in our expression. But the rejection or the sacrifice is all too often attempted through a critical or unforgiving attitude towards another person in whom we see this characteristic. Jesus teaches that what God asks from man is mercy, not sacrifice. The Christ pattern is integrative in nature. It tends to bring all the aspects of oneself together so that the confused or inharmonious ones may be lifted up and healed. This is exactly what we do when we choose to forgive ourselves and others. Forgiveness is an affirmation that purification can be achieved more effectively by accepting shortcomings and trusting that they can be healed in this spirit of love. 4, as each individual realizes, as these tenets may be analyzed, if God had condemned, what opportunity would there be for man to find his way back to God? Thus, each individual must do unto others as he would have his brother, the Christ, his God, the Father, do unto him. And indeed then apply first, last, and always his forgive, O God, as I forgive others. Find fault in me, O God, as I find fault in my brother. 4, as ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, is the law, not merely of sacrifice, not merely of recompense, but of grace and mercy, which are so sought for by the entity in the assurances of that as ye would be forgiven, so must ye forgive. For as ye do unto the least of my brethren, ye do unto thy Maker, is the spiritual law. 10, it is patient. Recall that as one of the 3 dimensions in man's experience, patience is the measure of one's understanding of the purpose of manifested ideas. That purpose is that man would show forth in his daily life the pattern that is shown in Jesus, that he might become aware of the reality of his being. Yet, as was given in those admonitions by him, who in the flesh was a manifestation or became the manifestation of the God consciousness in the material world. In patience, ye may become aware of or awaken to thy soul. In patience and living in that consciousness, I may bring to your remembrance all things from the foundations of the world. 11, it stresses the spirit in which we act. It has long been recognized that there is a relationship between the actions of a man and his inner state of awareness. Spiritual teachers for ages have tried to make use of this correspondence in order to help others reach particular levels of consciousness. There is a third factor that is an integral part of this process, and it has often been misunderstood or ignored. It is the importance of the attitude or the spirit in which the action is conducted. There are many popular consciousness-altering movements in our culture today. Many individuals have experienced heightened states of awareness by practicing specific techniques and rules taught in such courses. Some of these procedures or analogous ones related to various activities of the mind and body have been practiced for thousands of years. Throughout the experience of man in the material world at various seasons and periods, teachers or would-be teachers have come setting up certain forms or certain theories as to manners in which an individual shall control the appetites of the body or of the mind so as to attain some particular phase of development. In contrast to this, we have the pattern of Jesus, which is not concerned with rules or techniques, but emphasizes instead the spirit in which one lives. When our actions are motivated by the spirit of love, we can trust that they will be of such a nature as to awaken higher levels of consciousness. Carrying out rules or disciplines that are likely to alter one's consciousness does not guarantee that one will be able to operate with greater love and sensitivity at that new level of consciousness. It is a matter of what we put first in our lives. The affirmation that we are spiritual beings, hence concerned for purposes, or the belief that we are physical beings, hence preoccupation with techniques and rules of conduct. The reading continues. There has also come a teacher who was bold enough to declare himself as the Son of the living God. He set no rules of appetite. He set no rules of ethics other than, as ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. And to know, insomuch as ye do it unto the least of these my brethren, yet you do unto the Maker. He declared that the kingdom of heaven is within each individual entity's consciousness, to be attained, to be aware of, through meditating upon the fact that God is the Father of every soul. 12, it is humble. The nature of the Christ pattern is the union of the infinite and the finite. By that integration within man can be achieved, but that integration within man can be achieved only as the finite physical consciousness becomes aware of its limitations and surrenders itself to the purposes and will of the infinite spirit within. It is not that the finite man would seek to grasp at the infinite and pull himself into it. Instead, it is that he would humble himself and allow the infinite to interpenetrate his finitude. In this way is the spirit brought into the earth. We must claim that consciousness that God is our Father, that we were made in his image to be companions and co-creators with him. However, in so doing, we must also assume the attitude of Jesus, who humbled himself and became obedient unto death. That attitude realizes that only God is good, that we are merely channels through which the Spirit may flow, that it is not we who do good works, but only the Father in us, that we of ourselves can do nothing, and that he who would be greatest must be the servant of all. Humility is understanding the relationship between one's conscious physical self in the material world and the invisible forces of the soul. The opposite of humility is self-aggrandizement, in which there is a twisting of the truth that man has a divine nature. The result is an attitude that seeks to grasp at the infinite instead of being grasped and transformed by it. Humility should not be conceived of as self-degradation, but instead as an attitude of self-understanding and self-acceptance, which permits man to fulfill his purpose for being in the finite material world. Then in thine own self there are the needs to humble thyself before thy fellow man, not as one ashamed. Because the master was humble before the throng, the mockery, the rulers, the riffraff, and wore the purple robe and the crown of thorns, was he ashamed of his position? Then humbleness is not being ashamed, but rather as he, knowing in self that it is that necessary for God's will to be the better, the more perfectly, the more truly manifested in thine own experience. He is thy karma. In a sense, we can think of karma as the energizing of patterns which have been built by the mind at the fourth dimensional level. As an example, for a better understanding of how karma works, consider a device that we might construct to illustrate the way in which these patterns can affect life in the material world. Let this device be basically a cassette tape player, but built in such a way that many individual cassette tapes may be loaded into it at once, similar to the way in which records are placed in a jukebox. We shall construct this tape player so that the cassette tapes are stacked one on top of another. When a starter button is pushed, one of the tape cartridges is automatically inserted into the playing mechanism, and whatever is on the tape is heard. This device is built so that the nearer a tape is to the top of the stack, the more likely it is that it will be selected by the machine for playing. selections may be made automatically by buttons pushed by other people or by choices made by ourselves overriding the other selection devices. Now let us recall an instance from our experiences in which someone did something to us and we responded immediately without thinking. Many of us have experienced being shoved, and the immediate response is often to push back or to strike the person responsible. In the analogy, someone has pushed our starter button, and whatever response pattern or cassette tape is nearest the top of the stack is the one most likely to be selected and played. That is, manifested as our physical and emotional response. Often there is a stimulus from the outside world to which we react automatically. Later we say, I don't know what came over me. I didn't mean to do that. The alternative to automatic reactive behaviour is to begin to work with rearranging the hierarchy or the order in which those cassette tapes are stacked within us, to place those patterns associated with loving and creative expression at the top. We do this by the way that we focus our attention. Remember, mind is the builder, because when the attention is placed upon any pattern, two things happen. First, we energize that fourth dimensional pattern or cassette tape and invite it to project or express itself in the three-dimensional reality of our material lives. Second, we change its position within the mind, putting it into a place that makes it more likely to manifest in the future, even when an immediate reactive response is demanded. The analogy of a tape recording is a particularly instructive one for understanding the nature of karma. Karmic patterns are memories in much the same way that sounds recorded magnetically on tape are memories. Just as playing a tape recording does not erase it, living through a karmic experience does not necessarily rid us of our involvement with that pattern which brought on the experience. Karma is commonly referred to in terms of a debt. But there is a way in which this is easily misunderstood and the very nature of the growth process for man is ignored. Man grows in awareness only as he accepts responsibility for his own status as a co-creator with God. A karmic experience is a challenge to a man to consider a choice that he has once made or an attitude that he has once held, and to see that it was founded upon a misunderstanding of the laws of the universe. Until it is seen in this light, and a way more in accord with the law of love is chosen, that pattern previously built remains as a hindrance to growth. Meeting karma is not just letting the tape play, but working with new insights, constructive attitudes, and helpful purposes, and with a sense of personal responsibility as a different situation unfolds in our lives. We are not dealing with a God who is vengeful and who demands punishment for each transgression. In a sense, to believe such a thing is to look for an easy way out. Our situation is like that of a child who breaks a rule by sneaking cookies from the cookie jar between meals. We are not just to learn to put up with the resulting spanking that we receive, i.e. the payment of a debt, but instead we must come to understand why the rule exists and learn to live obediently within it. It is often far more difficult for a man to accept responsibility for his past, to see beyond his limited perspectives, and to change his behaviour than it is to take a punishment that supposedly evens things out. For example, a man who in one lifetime chooses to mutilate a physical body, his own or another's, may require of himself more than just one subsequent life in which he is physically impaired, i.e. to pay back the debt. Instead, it may take several lifetimes in such a state for him to come to the realization that the body is the temple and should be treated with love and respect. The important thing is not that the punishment be taken, but that there is a change in consciousness. We move out of our involvement with these limiting patterns that we have created only as we choose to place a pattern of greater love in a position of higher priority in our lives. Such a pattern is the one we have in Jesus. Although this pattern of love has always existed within us, through the life of Jesus, we were given greater access to it. In this sense, his work was at the fourth dimensional level. In the model of the mind of man that we have, the life of Jesus is depicted as a movement of the pattern of love from the superconscious into the subconscious. And the image shows the superconscious, and then below that the subconscious, and below that the conscious. In the biblical account, this is symbolized by the rending of the veil of the temple at his death. This veil was located between the inner court, corresponding to the subconscious, and the Holy of Holies, corresponding to the superconscious. The entity finds self, a body, a mind, a soul. These are as the shadows which were indicated in the mount by the outer court, the body, the inner court, the mind, and the still more holy of holies, the soul. These are but shadows, and yet indicate the trend of the development. Until the time of Jesus, the subconscious memory patterns of man proved a formidable barrier to any attempt by man's physical conscious mind to contact the superconscious level. In order to build the pattern at a level closer to man in his physical consciousness, Jesus had to contend with all the thought forms that mankind had collected at the fourth dimensional level. To establish the pattern in a place so accessible to man, Jesus had to deal with all the other patterns that were already there. Because this work was being done for mankind collectively, he had to deal with not just his own fourth dimensional thought patterns, but those of everyone. In this way, we can say that Jesus took on the sins, the karmic memories of the world. We have all experienced the principle that lies behind the necessity of his taking on these patterns. When you put something in a new place, you must deal with what is already there. If you move into a new home, you can expect to have to deal with your new neighbours to become involved in the interplay of the community. It was only by facing every temptation offered by the various thought patterns created by mankind that Jesus could make the manifestable pattern more accessible to man. Though man be far afield then, though he may have erred, there is established that which makes for a closer walk with him through that one who experienced all those turmoils, strifes, desires, urges that may be the lot of man in the earth. Attunement and grace then become only a matter of our choosing the pattern built by Jesus instead of the others to which we have equal access. In a sense, they are all there together at the fourth dimensional level, but it is only by an act of will that man can bring the pattern of love into his three-dimensional experience. The Edgar Cayce readings are very clear about the fact that we cannot make excuses for our reluctance to choose the pattern of Jesus, either by pointing to hindrances created by the world around us, or by blaming our parents for the genetic influences they have given us. Question was asked, are hereditary, environment, and will equal factors in aiding or retarding the entity's development? The answer was, will is the greater factor, for it may overcome any or all of the others, provided that will is made one with the pattern. See, For no influence of hereditary, environment, or whatnot surpasses the will. Else, why would there have been that pattern shown in which the individual soul, no matter how far astray it may have gone, may enter with him into the Holy of Holies? It is by using this will that we awaken from within the Christ consciousness. The question was asked, should the Christ consciousness be described as the awareness within the soul, imprinted in pattern on the mind, and waiting to be awakened by the will of the soul's oneness with God? Answer was correct. That's the idea exactly. The Christ consciousness is an awareness of our oneness with God that comes from within. It exists in the form of a pattern in the mind, i.e., at the fourth dimensional level. It is brought to the conscious awareness of man only as he uses his will and chooses that pattern as the ideal. Then the mind, beginning in meditation, uses that spiritual ideal to build upon until we move from awareness in the Christ consciousness to fulfillment in the Christ spirit. This is what is involved if we would contact the consciousness of the Master. It is not a matter of having a spirit guide or knowing a particular attuning chant or participating in rigorous disciplines of body and mind. It is a matter of choosing, awakening, building, living, and becoming the life of balance and of love as exemplified in Jesus. The question was asked, how may I raise my vibrations so as to contact the Christ? The answer was making the will, the desire of the heart, one with his. Question was asked, is Jesus the Christ on any particular sphere, or is he manifesting on the earth plane in another body? The answer is not in a body in the earth, but may come at will to him who wills to be one with and acts in love to make same possible. If we think of karma as the energizing of patterns that the mind has built at the fourth dimensional level, we can understand one of the most remarkable statements from the Edgar Cayce readings. What is karma and what is pattern? He alone is each soul pattern. He alone is each soul pattern. He is thy karma, if ye put thy trust wholly in him. Know that thy body is the temple of the living God. There ye may seek communion. There ye may seek counsel as to the choices to be made, the directions to be taken. Thus does he, as in his promise, lo, I am with thee always unto the end, become thy way, and become that termed by some thy karma. If we will choose to make it so, our experience in the material world will be a product of our involvement with the pattern of Jesus and not with the patterns of selfishness and limitation that are so often chosen. For if you will read the book of Revelation with the idea of the body as the interpretation, you will understand yourself and learn to really analyze, psychoanalyze, mentally analyze others. But you will have to learn to apply it in self first. For the motivating force in each one of these patterns represented is that which the individual entity entertains as the ideal. This is the motivating spirit, the motivating purpose. When it is out of attune or not coordinating with the first cause, there may not be the greater unfoldment. For it is in self that it becomes out of attune, it loses its power or ability. It loses creative energy or its hold upon the first cause, that is the creator or God. Through what channels do these approach the activity?
through mind. Mind as a stream, not mind as purely physical or as wholly spiritual, but it is that which shapes, which forms, which controls, which directs, which builds, which acts upon. Each one of us is challenged personally to decide what will we do with the opportunity that is given to choose the life of love and of self-understanding. What then will you do with Jesus? For he is the way, he is the light, he is the hope, he is ready. Will you let him into your heart, thy heart, or will you keep him afar or apart? Will ye not eat of his body, of the bread of life? Drink from that fountain that he builds in the minds, the hearts, the souls of those that seek to know him and his purposes with men, with the world. For having overcome the world, he indeed has it, as it were, in the palm of his hand, and has entrusted to you this because of his faith, his love for you. What will you do about Jesus and his trust in you? And that's the end of the presentation, the end of chapter 5.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
That was interesting, very interesting.
The other, this analogy of having all of these tapes that respond once we press a button or someone else presses the button, we respond with a tape. Another analogy that Mark Thurston always used to talk about was a slide projector. That we have all of these slides that we can project out into the world, which are all the patterns that we have stored inside of us. Unfortunately, the Christ consciousness slide is quite often the one at the bottom of the pile covered in dust. Get it out, dust it off and put it at the top of the pile so that no matter what, whatever happens, the response we have is the Christ consciousness slide that we project out into the world.
I was thinking when we were reading about the tape or the records, and I thought, wow, those young people who are reading these things must be wondering what it is.
Yeah, me too.
And what's a slide projector?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's a juke player?
Jukebox.
Yes.
That's another one. Jukebox.
Yeah, we'll have to update that with an iPod or something.
Something that they understand.
But I think they would still understand it because they know, like a Spotify list in a way. You can have a list in a sequence, but yeah.
I like the differentiating the Christ and Jesus. You know how everyone. I wonder how many so-called Christians actually think about that there is a difference.
They don't, probably.
No, they don't. Well, I didn't when I was in the established churches.
No. The Christ consciousness is like a different concept. It's in universal spirituality, which is what I think we are picking up on. Yeah.
Given the difference between the Christ consciousness and the Christ spirit.
Yes, that's
Christ consciousness is the awareness. Christ spirit is living that awareness.
Living the awareness.
Jesus was the pattern. The Christ is the power. So it's interesting the way that the Cayce readings really differentiate between Jesus, who became the Christ, and the Christ consciousness, the Christ spirit.
I've read them in some of these Cayce books talking about the Christ consciousness like being the highest consciousness from any spiritual pattern or tradition. And I think it is like that in a way, really, like this high role of love is in many other religions and other spiritual traditions. And sort of like it is the same thing, Christ consciousness, only expressed differently in different spiritual traditions.
I always wondered about the word Krishna, if that is the equivalent of like the Christ in us or the Christos, you know. I always wondered about that.
I think I've read that it is. That
It is?
an equivalent in
Yeah, Krishna.
that are analysing across the different religions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a different sort of persona to Krishna compared to the persona of Christ.
It also fascinates me how the Hindu images, it's like androgynous. You can't tell a man from a woman.
I'll show you what I have here. Something funny. I hope it comes through in the picture. That is a picture of Lord Krishna.
Oh, right.
I have that on the wall here. I better get one of Christ as well, but I have one of Krishna here.
Krishna. Yeah, how interesting. Yeah. Because, you know, with all this gender business, you know, dominating the news and stuff like that, you know, the God, the God that I know hasn't got a agenda. it's
Yeah, God. So when we speak of God, we could use they. I know it's one, but it's not he and it's not she, so it's they.
I call it.
We don't do that now.
No?
We don't use they, but some people use he, she. And because I am a former Catholic, Mary was really big in Catholicism.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking, where is Mary? You know, we don't never talk about, and yet they say that Mary was the twin soul of Jesus. But in many, it doesn't get a mention out of, you know, Catholicism. There you will find Jesus and Mary there, but then it's like the mother and the infant, and the caring for. It's not the twin soul idea. It's a different image. But it's very interesting that I would like to see Mary have a bigger place. You know, as feminine goddess. And we don't really have that.
Well, really, to me, God is more feminine than masculine, because the God of the New Testament that Jesus talked about is a God of love, compassion, caring. The God of the Old Testament seemed to be the one that was domineering and punishing and, you know, smiting the enemies and things. It sounds very masculine, whereas the God of the New Testament is loving and caring. So that sounds more feminine to me. But really, I always say Father, Mother, God, because it's everything, the whole thing combined.
I find the word God itself has this image of a masculinity. It's a bit. I like the word good. Instead, put the word good there instead of God, because I think it derives from good. The old ancient European world. That's where God comes from. Yeah. Well, that was very interesting. Hey, that's good.
So, chapter 6 next week.
Okay. Thanks for preparing that, Russell. I learn something every time we have this meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you all for
thank you, Russell,
being a part of this. It's I think we're all learning from this.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right.
Just have a moment of quiet and prayer. If we could just become aware of that part of us, that Christ pattern deep within, our awareness of our oneness with God, with all creation. the true nature of our individuality. It is always a part of us because we are one with God, always, no matter how far we stray. And Father, Mother God, Christ Jesus, we're so grateful for uncovering this awareness, this pattern of our oneness with Thee. To know that we are our brother's keeper because we are our brother. We are one with all creation. We are not separate. We are all one, and we all live and move and have our being in Thee. Thank you. Amen.
Thank you.
Okay, well,
So,
wonderful, wonderful week, everyone.
Same.
I'll see you tomorrow night, Liz. We've got our study.
yep, perfect.
Bye, Eva. Bye, Liz.
Bye-bye, Eva.
Well.
Bye, Lolita.
Bye,
Thank you all.
Lolita. Bye, Russell.
Good night.